Snow buries New York in white silence. 3:12 a.m., December 11, 1978. Six masked men storm Lufthansa's cargo terminal at JFK Airport. No shots fired. No alarms tripped. In 12 minutes they vanish with $6 million in cash and jewels, the biggest U.S. heist ever. But the twist? The money's gone forever and co-conspirators drop dead like snowflakes. Who will stop them? On a frigid December night in 1978, as New York City lay blanketed under a relentless snowfall, John F. Kennedy International Airport in Queens became the stage for one of the most audacious heists in American criminal history. It was an era when airports were gateways to the world, filled with the roar of jet engines, the scent of kerosene, and endless lines of passengers in wool coats and fedoras. But behind the gleaming facades of terminals lurked another world. Cargo warehouses where millions in cash, gold bars, and jewels moved in armored containers, guarded by armed security and intricate alarm systems. That night, December 11th, at 3:12 a.m., a group of masked men stormed Lufthansa Cargo Building 261, making off with a haul worth nearly $5 million, $3.8 million in uninsured cash and $1 million in jewelry and gold bullion. The heist, later dubbed the Lufthansa Heist, seemed impossible. No witnesses, no alarms triggered, no trace left behind. Yet behind this impossibility lay meticulous planning, insider betrayal, and human frailties that would unravel only decades later. The FBI received the first report of the crime at 4:16 a.m., when a night shift guard, bound to a pole in the basement, finally freed himself and called the police. They knew everything, he later testified in a report. The codes, the schedules, even where the spare key to the vault was. By then, the perpetrators had vanished into the night, leaving behind an empty warehouse and a million questions. How could six men breach one of New York's most fortified facilities without raising a single alarm? Why did the security systems, motion sensors, cameras, and armed patrols, fail? And where did the money go, a prize that rivaled the biggest scores in mob history? To understand this story, we must rewind to the sweltering summer of 1978, when New York was a city teetering on the edge, plagued by strikes, an energy crisis, and a wave of organized crime. Jimmy Burke, known in criminal circles as Jimmy the Gent, was a 45-year-old Irishman from Brooklyn, raised in the hardscrabble streets where the only way up was through the underworld. Standing 6 feet 1 inch with close-cropped hair and always in a crisp suit, Jimmy could pass for a successful businessman, but his life was a tangle of debts, gambling, and ties to the Lucchese crime family, one of New York's 5 mafia dynasties. "I don't rob banks," he'd tell his crew over whiskey at Robert's Lounge in South Ozone Park. "I rob the system." His motive was simple: greed compounded by desperation. After a string of failed cigarette smuggling deals, Jimmy owed the mob over $100,000, and the Lufthansa heist was his ticket out. But he couldn't pull it off alone. He needed an inside man. Thomas Brennan, a 38-year-old cargo handler at Lufthansa, was the perfect mark. Born in a working-class pocket of Queens, Thomas had been with the airline since 1965, starting as an aircraft cleaner and rising to senior cargo supervisor. Earning $12 an hour, he barely kept his head above water. A wife, 2 kids, a mortgage on a modest home in Jamaica Estates, and mounting medical bills for his son's illness. "I'm not a criminal," he'd think, staring into the mirror each morning. "But how else do I pay these bills?" His psychological profile was textbook. A diligent worker broken by the system. Jimmy met Thomas at a dive bar near the airport, where he drowned his sorrows after shifts. After weeks of friendly chats, Jimmy made his pitch: $50,000 for details on cargo schedules, access codes, and security blind spots. Thomas hesitated, his conscience gnawing like a rat in the basement. "What if I get caught?" he whispered to himself at night, tossing in bed. "But what if I don't? It changes everything." Planning began in August. Jimmy assembled a crew of 5, 2 Irishmen from his gang, an Italian tied to the mob, and 2 muscle men for the heavy lifting. They met in a rundown garage in Inwood, sketching airport layouts on a chalkboard. JFK sprawled over 5,000 acres with 8 terminals, 30 miles of roads, and daily traffic of 100,000 passengers. The Lufthansa cargo terminal was a fortress: 12-inch reinforced concrete walls, doors with magnetic card locks, and patrols with dogs every 15 minutes. Cargo arrived on a Boeing 747 from Frankfurt at 11:45 p.m., unloaded at night when the airport slept. "We hit at 3 a.m., Jimmy explained, pointing at the map. "That's when the guard shift is thinnest, 6 guys, 2 of whom are ours." Thomas provided the critical details. Cash containers weighed 100 pounds each, labeled as bank transfers for New York banks, stored in room 14B with a vault rated for $10 million. The atmosphere that summer was tense. New York in 1978 was a city on the brink. Blackouts, serial killers like Son of Sam, and a mafia controlling ports and airports. Jimmy grew paranoid, checking his phone for taps, switching routes to meetings. "If anyone rats," he told the crew, staring each man down, "I'll find you in hell." Thomas, meanwhile, wrestled with guilt. During one shift as he checked cargo, his hands shook. "It's just paper," he reassured himself. "No one gets hurt." But deep down he knew, this was a betrayal of his colleagues, of the system he'd helped build. The day arrived. December 11, 1978, began like any other. Snowfall delayed flights, but the Frankfurt cargo jet landed on time at 11:45 p.m. The haul, 72 boxes of cash from Deutsche Bank and 15 containers of jewelry from European firms, was unloaded by 12:30 a.m. Thomas, working the night shift, signed the paperwork. Cargo received £5,500, value confidential. He knew the security, Brinks guards, carried 9mm Smith & Wesson pistols and Motorola radios. But that night, one guard, our guy, named Louis Werner, accidentally left room 14B's door ajar for 5 minutes longer than protocol. At 3:12 a.m. Jimmy's crew rolled up in a stolen Ford Econoline van, painted in airport colors. Masked and armed with sawed-off shotguns and pistols, they moved like shadows. "Quick and quiet," Jimmy whispered, stepping out. "No shots." They subdued 2 guards at the entrance, zip-tying them and forcing them to open the main door with code 7482. Inside, the dim glow of yellow sodium lights cast an eerie haze, smells of metal, rubber, and sweat. The containers stood in rows like soldiers, 100 pounds each, sealed with wax. "This is it," Jimmy thought, slicing a seal with a knife. "My way out." But then came the first twist. One container was lighter than expected. "What the hell?" a crew member hissed. "It's just paper." Jimmy checked. Instead of gold, it held dummy documents. Did Thomas screw us? Flashed through his mind, but there was no time to dwell. They loaded the rest, 58 cash boxes and 12 jewelry containers, in 12 minutes using a hydraulic cart. By 3:24 a.m. they were out, leaving the guards bound in the basement with a warning, "Tell the cops we know where you live." The van disappeared into the blizzard, heading to a prearranged garage in Brooklyn to split the take. Thomas finished his shift at 4 a.m., driving home in his beat-up 1972 Chevrolet Impala, heart pounding. "They did it," he thought, eyes on the road. "Am I rich now or damned?" The FBI arrived at 5:15 a.m., surveying the scene. No fingerprints, no cameras catching faces. "This was an inside job," Agent John Smith wrote in his report. "Someone knew every move." But the money vanished without a trace. Where was it? Who else was involved? And why was one container fake, accident, or part of a bigger plot? These questions hung in the air like the smoke from Jimmy's cigarette as he eyed the stacks of cash in the garage. This is just the start, he thought. The mob will want their cut. Thomas, at home, hid his share under the garage floorboards, unaware that paranoia was only beginning. The snow had stopped falling by the morning of December 12, 1978, but the Lufthansa heist left New York City in a different kind of storm. One of suspicion, paranoia, and a relentless pursuit for answers. The FBI's field office in Manhattan buzzed with activity as agents pored over the crime scene reports from JFK's Cargo Building 261. This wasn't a smash and grab, Agent John Smith told his team, slamming a stack of Polaroids on the table, images of empty vaults, zip-tied guards, and a warehouse floor dusted with snow tracked in by the thieves. This was surgical. Someone on the inside handed them the keys. The heist, valued at $5 million, $3.8 million in cash, $1 million in jewels and gold, was the largest cash robbery in U.S. history at the time, and the pressure from Washington was palpable. The Lufthansa heist wasn't just a crime. It was a challenge to the system, a middle finger to the FBI, the NYPD, and the airlines that powered global commerce. The investigation began with a flurry of activity. By 8 a.m., agents had cordoned off the cargo terminal, a sprawling concrete bunker surrounded by chain-link fences and razor wire. The facility was still operational. Trucks rumbled in, forklifts beeped, and planes roared overhead, but the crime scene was frozen in time. The vault in room 14B, a steel behemoth with a 2-inch thick door, stood open, its contents gone except for a single crate of dummy documents. Why leave this behind? Agent Maria Torres, a forensic accountant newly assigned to the case, mused as she examined the crate. Weighing only 20 pounds, it was stuffed with blank paper and a few forged bank transfer forms. Was it a mistake or a deliberate misdirection? The question gnawed at her, a thread she'd pulled for months. The FBI's first lead came from the guards. 6 Brinks employees were on duty that night, all found bound in the basement. Their statements were consistent. 6 masked men, armed with shotguns and pistols, moved with military precision. They knew the code, 7482, one guard, Paul Carter, said, his voice shaky. They knew my name, my kids' names. Said they'd come for us if we talked. But one guard, Lewis Werner, seemed off. His answers were too polished, his demeanor too calm. When pressed, he claimed he'd been knocked out, but Torres noticed no bruises on his face. He's hiding something, she wrote in her notebook. Werner, a 42-year-old veteran guard with gambling debts, became suspect number 1. Meanwhile in Brooklyn, Jimmy Burke was unraveling. The heist had gone off without a hitch, but the fake crate haunted him. In the dim light of the Inwood garage, surrounded by his crew, he counted the haul. 58 boxes of cash, each containing $65,000 in 20s and 50s, and 12 containers of jewelry, emerald necklaces, diamond rings, and gold bars stamped with Swiss hallmarks. The total was staggering, but the missing gold from the dummy crate meant someone had played them. Thomas, Jimmy growled, pacing the oil-stained floor. That bastard better not be double-crossing me. His paranoia was justified. The Lucchese family, led by Capo Paul Vario, expected a $2 million cut, and any shortfall could mean a bullet. Jimmy's crew, Tommy DeSimone, a volatile 28-year-old enforcer, Angelo Sepe, a methodical 34-year-old driver, and 2 hired hands, Vinny and Joey, felt the tension. We split it now and lay low, Jimmy ordered. No spending, no talking. Thomas Brennan, back at his modest Jamaica Estates home, was a wreck. The $50,000 stuffed in a toolbox under his garage floor felt like a ticking bomb. Every creak of the house, every passing car made him jump. Did I miss something? He thought, replaying the heist in his mind. He'd given Jimmy the exact schedules. Flight LH-1420 from Frankfurt, landing at 11:45 p.m., cargo unloaded by 12:30 a.m., guards changing at 2 a.m. He'd even slipped Werner, the guard, $10,000 to leave the door ajar. But the dummy crate wasn't his doing. Someone else knew, he whispered to his reflection in the bathroom mirror, his face pale. His wife, Ellen, noticed his unease but didn't ask questions. You okay, Tom? She said over breakfast, her voice soft but probing. Just tired, he lied, his stomach churning. The FBI's investigation gained traction by January 1979. Torres, digging into Lufthansa's records, found discrepancies in the cargo manifests. The dummy crate was listed as bank transfers 100 pounds, but its actual weight was logged at 20 pounds. Someone altered the paperwork, she told Smith, pointing to a smudged signature, Thomas Brennan's. A background check revealed Thomas's financial strain, $12,000 in medical debt, a second mortgage, and recent ATM withdrawals totaling $2,000, unusual for a man earning $25,000 a year. He's our link, Torres said, but Smith cautioned against rushing. We need hard evidence, not hunches. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a tipster. On January 15th, a bartender at Robert's Lounge, a known mob hangout, called the FBI anonymously. Check the garbage trucks in Brooklyn, he said, his voice muffled. They're moving something big. Agents tracked garbage routes to a sanitation yard in Canarsie, where they found a shredded manifest matching Lufthansa's cargo. Forensic analysis revealed traces of ink from a printer used at JFK's cargo office. This ties back to the airport, Smith said, ordering surveillance on Thomas and Werner. As the FBI closed in, the mob's world began to fracture. Jimmy, under pressure from Paul Vario, ordered his crew to stay silent, but Tommy DeSimone, the hot-headed enforcer, was reckless. He flashed cash at bars, bought a Cadillac, and bragged about hitting the jackpot. "Shut your mouth, Tommy," Jimmy snapped during a tense meeting in February. But the damage was done. Vario, smelling trouble, demanded Jimmy clean house. On February 20th, Vinny, one of the hired hands, was found dead in a dumpster, shot twice in the head. "That's a message," Torres noted, reviewing the coroner's report. "They're tying up loose ends." Thomas, unaware of Vinny's fate, felt the walls closing in. On March 1st, he spotted an unmarked car outside his house, a black Ford Crown Victoria, classic FBI. His paranoia spiked. "They know," he thought, checking the toolbox for the 10th time that day. He considered running but had nowhere to go. His son's next hospital bill was due in a week. "I did this for them," he told himself, but the lie felt hollow. At work, he avoided Werner, whose shifty eyes betrayed his own fear. "You hear about Vinny?" Werner whispered one night in the break room. Thomas froze. "What about him?" "He's gone," Werner said, his voice barely audible. "Keep your head down, Tommy." By April, the FBI had enough to bring Thomas in for questioning. On April 10th, agents knocked on his door at 7 a.m. "Mr. Brennan, we need to talk about Lufthansa," Smith said, his tone calm but firm. Thomas's heart sank. In the interrogation room, Torres laid out the evidence. The altered manifest, his financial records, and Werner's inconsistent statements. "You're in deep, Thomas," she said. "Talk and maybe you see your kids again." Thomas said nothing, his mind racing. "I'm not a rat," he thought, but the weight of his choices crushed him. Across town, Jimmy was planning his next move. The fake crate still bothered him. Had Thomas swapped it? Or was there a bigger player? Someone in the mob or even Lufthansa's management? He didn't know, but he felt the noose tightening. "We need to disappear," he told Angelo Sepe, his most trusted man. But disappearing with $3.8 million was easier said than done, especially with the FBI and the mob watching. The investigation was far from over. A new lead emerged. A partial fingerprint on the dummy crate, missed in the initial sweep. "It's not Thomas's or Werner's," Torres said, staring at the lab report. "We've got a third player." Who was it? And where was the money? The answers lay buried in a web of lies, betrayal, and bodies piling up in Brooklyn's back alleys. By the summer of 1979, the Lufthansa heist had become a festering wound in New York's underbelly. The FBI's Manhattan field office was a pressure cooker, with Agent John Smith and Maria Torres working 18-hour days to crack a case that seemed to slip further away with each lead. The $5 million haul, $3.8 million in cash, $1 million in jewels and gold, remained elusive, and the bodies were piling up. The discovery of Vinny's corpse in a Brooklyn dumpster was followed by another. Joey, the second hired hand, found in a shallow grave in Staten Island on May 3, 1979, his throat slit. "The mob's cleaning house," Torres told Smith, her voice heavy with frustration. "If we don't move fast, there'll be no one left to talk." The Lufthansa heist wasn't just a robbery anymore. It was a deadly game of trust and betrayal, with the FBI, the Lucchese family, and a mysterious third player pulling the strings. The courtroom at 225 Cadman Plaza East in Brooklyn became the stage for the heist's unraveling in October 1979. Thomas Brennan, arrested after weeks of surveillance, faced charges of grand larceny and conspiracy. Louis Werner, the compromised guard, was indicted alongside him. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Ellen Carter, built a case on forensic evidence. The tampered cargo manifest, Thomas's bank records showing $50,000 in cash deposits, and Werner's gambling debts paid off overnight. But the real bombshell was the fingerprint on the dummy crate, identified as belonging to Anthony Russo, a mid-level Lucchese associate who worked as a Lufthansa cargo scheduler. "Russo's our third man," Torres said, slamming the lab report on Smith's desk. "He swapped the gold for paper before the heist even happened." The trial, covered by every major newspaper from the New York Times to the Daily News, gripped the city. Thomas took the stand on October 15, his face gaunt, his hands trembling. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," he said, his voice cracking. "I just needed the money for my son's treatments." The courtroom fell silent as he described his descent. The hospital bills, the late-night talks with Jimmy Burke, the promise of a way out. "I gave them the schedules, the codes," he admitted, tears streaming. "But the fake crate? That wasn't me." His wife Ellen sat in the gallery clutching their daughter's hand, her eyes fixed on the floor. The jury, a mix of blue-collar workers and retirees, listened intently, torn between sympathy and disgust. Werner's testimony was less emotional, more calculated. "I didn't know the full plan," he claimed, adjusting his glasses. "I just left the door open for $10,000. But under Carter's cross-examination, his story unraveled. Bank records showed $20,000 deposited into his account the day after the heist, and a wiretap caught him bragging to a bookie about hitting the jackpot. The prosecution painted him as a willing cog in the machine, a man who sold his integrity for a quick payout. Russo, however, was the enigma. Arrested in September after a tip from a mob informant, he refused to talk, invoking his Fifth Amendment rights. His lawyer argued the fingerprint was circumstantial, but the jury wasn't convinced. Jimmy Burke, the mastermind, remained a ghost. Despite the FBI's efforts, wiretaps, informants, and 24/7 surveillance, he evaded arrest. "He's a shadow," Smith grumbled, reviewing grainy photos of Jimmy entering Robert's lounge. The Lucchese family, under Paul Vario's iron grip, shielded him, but rumors swirled that Vario was furious about the missing gold. "Someone's playing both sides," an informant told the FBI, hinting at a deeper conspiracy. Was Russo working alone, skimming the gold for himself? Or was Vario himself behind the dummy crate, testing Jimmy's loyalty? These questions hung over the trial like a storm cloud. On November 12, 1979, the verdicts came down. Thomas was convicted on all counts, sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. Werner got 5 years. Russo, charged with racketeering and theft, received 12 years, his silence protecting higher-ups in the Lucchese family. The courtroom erupted as Thomas's daughter sobbed, and Ellen walked out, unable to face the reporters. "Justice was served," Carter told the press, but her words rang hollow. The money, $3.8 million in cash, most of the jewels, was still missing. Only $50,000 was recovered from Thomas's garage, and a single emerald necklace turned up in a pawn shop in Queens. "The rest is gone," Torres said, closing her case file. "Buried, laundered, or burned." The moral weight of the heist lingered. Thomas, in his cell at Danbury, wrote letters to his son, apologizing for breaking the family. Werner, paroled in 1983, disappeared into obscurity, rumored to have fled to Florida under a new name. Russo was killed in prison in 1981, shanked in the shower. "A mob hit," the guards whispered. Jimmy Burke remained free until 1982, when an unrelated drug bust finally brought him down. He died in prison in 1996, never admitting his role in Lufthansa. The Lucchese family continued to thrive, their empire untouched by the trial's fallout. Years later, in 2014, a retired Torres sat down for an HBO documentary, her hair gray, her voice steady. "We got the small fish," she said, staring into the camera. "But the big ones? They swam away." She recounted a final twist. In 1984, a construction crew in Brooklyn unearthed a rusted safe containing $200,000 in Lufthansa cash, buried under a vacant lot owned by a Vario associate. "It was a fraction of the haul," she said. "The rest? Probably scattered across Swiss banks, Vegas casinos, or mob safehouses." The documentary crew pressed her. Did she believe Russo acted alone? Torres paused, her eyes distant. "No," she said finally. "Someone above him pulled the strings. We'll never know who. For the families, the scars never healed." Ellen Brennan divorced Thomas in 1980, raising their children alone. "He thought he was saving us," she told a reporter in 1990. "Instead, he lost us." The Lufthansa heist became legend, immortalized in books and films, but its true cost was measured in broken lives, guards who lost trust, families torn apart, and a city reminded that justice often comes up short. The heist's final mystery endures. What happened to the missing gold? Who planted the dummy crate? And how did millions vanish into thin air? As Torres said in her closing interview, some secrets stay buried. But the truth? It's out there waiting for someone to dig deeper.